Okay, my name is Senator John Edwards. I chair the Senate Judiciary Committee, and with me is Senator Barbara Favola, who chairs the Senate Rehabilitation and Social Services Committee. We've agreed to have a joint meeting of these two committees in anticipation of the special session that's coming up sometime in August. The purpose of this meeting is to hear testimony on issues relating to reform ideas concerning the criminal justice system and law enforcement. And the meeting will be streamed online. The meeting is convened virtually because of the situation we're in, as you well know. But for technical reasons, the public testimony is not going to be available to be heard on at this meeting. However, testimony from the public can be submitted in writing to, quote, public comment at senate.virginia.gov. That's public comment at senate.virginia.gov. And members of the committee will receive copies of any testimony anyone wants to submit up to July the 31st. So with that opening statement, I'd like to turn it over to Senator Barbara Favola for her opening statement.
Thank you, Senator Edwards. And it is, I think, a very good thing that both of our committees are meeting together. There's certainly overlap, and the issue of police reform and criminal justice reform, both those issues are broad-based and very important. I just wanted to add a few additional comments regarding the request for public comment. We did send out, Senator Edwards and myself did send out a request to about 40 organizations. That list was not intended to be comprehensive. I believe a copy of the list was included in everybody's packet today and can be made available. We made every effort to try to find representative organizations from all the stakeholder groups, not just those who are advocating for change, but we contacted law enforcement, we contacted Commonwealth attorneys, and then we contacted groups that do a lot of defense work, as well as the NAACP chapters around the state. So we put a suggested deadline of July 31st, really with the intent that it might help lawmakers in drafting legislation if we received the written statements by the 31st. That is not a hard and fast deadline. Individuals or groups may submit written comments to us at any time, and they will all be dispersed to every member of each committee, Judiciary and Rehab and Social Services. And again, I will just reiterate, Senator Edwards mentioned this. I think it's worth saying again, if you do want to submit a written comment, please go to the email. It's public with an public_comment at senate.virginia.gov. And perhaps, Hobie, you can put that on the screen somewhere so folks have it easily available. Those are my remarks, and I will just say that the presentations today were intended to give us as broad an overview as possible of the situation as it currently exists, and also some experts talking to us about evidence-based reform strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I want to underline the fact that the issues concerning the Judiciary Committee overlap with Rehab and Social Services, because the conditions of our society, socially, politically, economically, have a big impact on the criminal justice system. Poverty and crime are interrelated, as we know. If you want to have a peaceful society, you must have a fair society and a just society. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, the distinguished Honorable Brian J. Moran, the Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security, who has a long history in law enforcement as well. And this is his second term as being Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security. So, Honorable Brian Moran, are you there?
I am here, Senator Edwards. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes.
Great. Well, first, thank you very much, Chair Favola, Chair Edwards, for inviting me to kick off the Senate joint committees. I think this is extremely important. for us to evaluate and discuss the continued criminal justice reforms in addition to law enforcement reforms. So very much appreciate the opportunity to present. And in the spirit of a broad presentation, I think to kick it off, you're going to see a bit of a broad presentation from our public safety agencies, but happy to, as we delve into this more over the coming weeks, look forward to continuing a dialogue and discussion with you all. I will say the Northam administration, Governor Northam, has leaned in on criminal justice reform from the very beginning, as you well know. Also, gun violence prevention methods. We had a very exciting ceremonial bill signing just yesterday, signing a number of pieces of legislation. Many of you were able to join us, so thank you. And that was extremely exciting. Like you, Senator Edwards, been around this system for a while, and to see those bills actually come to fruition was really very satisfying and exciting for the Commonwealth. So we look forward to their implementation. Criminal justice reform, too, has something the governor has felt strongly about. And those issues actually in the Senate in particular have been of a bipartisan nature. We saw larceny threshold, decriminalization of marijuana, driver's licenses, both for fines and costs, as well as non-moving violations be subject to bipartisan work. So look forward to that cooperation continuing as well. And the governor leaned more than just the shiny objects, the ornaments, but also things that really work in our criminal justice system. Like you, I've been in it now since 1989. And there's a lot of investments that need to be made in our criminal justice system to ensure a fair and equitable system. Prosecution and defense needs to be, both sides of the table need to be competent counsel. And that's why the governor, with your assistance, made substantial investments in our public defender's offices this year. We created a new one in Prince William, in addition to providing additional resources for salaries in our public defender's offices. So those are some of the things that really work in our criminal justice system to make sure it is fair and equitable and ultimately just. So we look forward to continuing those efforts with you all. So in terms of the agencies that are going to be responsible for a lot of the implementation and the formulation of legislation, we kick off with the Department of Corrections. That is our largest agency. And of course, I'm joining you here from the Situation Room. This has been the site of our COVID response. And I really have some exciting news with respect to what's going on at corrections. As you can see there, we have 28,000 inmates, a very large agency. Harold Clark does a fabulous job. Very proud of our lowest recidivism rate in the nation, thanks to y'all investing in reentry and rehabilitation programs. And, with respect to COVID, I know you've all expressed concern, and we've shared that concern with a virus that is so contagious. What would it mean for congregate housing? Well, early on, this administration aggressively tested in our prisons. And now, as of today, we've tested over 22,000 inmates. That represents about 78%, more than 3/4 of the entire population. During the course, the cumulative numbers since March, when we started testing, we've had 1,515 inmates test positive. But as of today, we have 16 active cases in all of our correctional facilities. That's 28,000 inmates, 40 correctional facilities, 16 active cases. So that really is a credit to Harold and his team, and also the point prevalence testing, the aggressive testing, because we know asymptomatic cases exist. We need to find them out and have knowledge of those as soon as possible. Next, Department of DCJS. Now, this is the agency, Shannon Dion being she joined a call with Senator Marsden and others just yesterday. This is the agency that's going to be working a lot on some of these issues. They're responsible for training, and I know training in the academies. We're going to take a really deep dive into that. And so we look forward, and they also provide DCJS, the justice grants, and also there's discussion with respect to HB 599 money and some strings that would be attached to HB 599. So DCJS is going to be playing a role in those issues. Next. DJJ, again, Valerie Boykin taking over for Andy Block. She's doing a fabulous job. Again, on COVID, I know many of you signed a letter early on expressing deep concern for our residents. And at that time, I assured you that Valerie and her team consider the residents at Bon Air to be their kids. They treat them just like they treat their own. And I'm pleased to say between May 2nd to July 2nd, we had 0 positive cases. For over 2 months, 0 positive cases at Bon Air. The population now is at 157. DJJ has been the subject of transformation since beginning in the McAuliffe administration, continued with vigor from the Northam administration, and we'll continue to work diligently on that, really focusing on community-based services. Next. I want to get through these slides, I know, because any questions. VDIM, not going to be too involved in law enforcement reform or criminal justice reform, but I do want to just give them a shout out because they are a very important public safety agency. And we do have leadership change there. Jeff Stern has left to go head up the Institute of Management Training, Emergency Management Training, training all national emergency managers. So he's got a phenomenal job with FEMA. And Curtis Brown has taken over. He's been heading up our health equity group task force with respect to the COVID crisis. Very knowledgeable, very experienced in emergency management. So he's someone new to get to know. We're in hurricane season, y'all. As Dick Saslow said yesterday, all we need now is a hurricane and an earthquake. And I know he was kidding. We don't need those. I don't even like to mention them, but we are in hurricane season. And you know, we have to do more than just one. You know, we have a historic, unprecedented pandemic, but we also need to prepare for other emergencies. Oh, and also with the protests, VDIM has been monitoring those. You know, we've had 511 protests, and it's really, I mean, in many ways, it's pretty phenomenal. It's from, you know, from far Southwest Virginia up to Winchester and up to obviously Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. So they've been monitoring that. So as you can tell, it's 510, but as of today, it's 511. Check this morning. Next. DFS, quickly, you know, big announcement this weekend. We've eliminated all background. I know, Senator Favola, you worked on that issue, the rape kits task force that we had a couple of years ago under the McAuliffe administration, continued. Northam and Mark Herring with the Attorney General, we've eliminated all rape background. So that's an, and this is really so important to DFS. You know, they perform the back office work, labs, tests in our criminal justice system. So I just want to give them a shout out. Next up.
Right.
Next up. Yeah. Oh, fire programs, houses State Fire Marshal Mike Riley out of Fairfax. They're another one of our important, a lot of training going on with respect, and we've worked closely with them over the COVID too, because of our first responders, you know, and making sure that they're tested and remain safe during the COVID pandemic. Next up. Okay, so Virginia State Police, obviously this will be a major player as we go forward. Gary Settle taking over for Steve Flaherty, terrific former sheriff out of Rappahannock, longtime state trooper out of the BCI, Bureau of Corrections. Many of you go to national forums, the state, and hear from other states. You know, important to note, our Virginia State Police are not only highway patrol, those of you, you know, you see them on 95 and 64, but they also do Bureau of Criminal Investigations, and you've seen them. They've been involved in the protests. Now, again, they are only in support. They are not unilateral nor primary law enforcement when it comes to any of these protests. They have monitored. They've been requested to support as many as 140 of the recent protests, and from Marion just recently down in Smith County. And as you can see there, 2,100 sworn. They are having an academy class. They're having a class right now, go through the academy. We've been over there. They're taking some extreme measures to make sure that separation is observed and trying to get another class, because that's a challenge right now. And this is going to be important, folks, as we go forward about recruitment. We want more diversity in our law enforcement agencies, and in working with our state police, I know they've taken steps to try to accomplish that, and other issues regarding the state police. So speaking of Southwest Virginia, I skipped one talking point back to deal. Don't go back slides, but just verbally. Those of you who are familiar with Bland, we have a Bland Correctional Facility, and we really received some good news just this week. We did point prevalence testing at the Bland Correctional Facility. 574 inmates were tested, no positive cases. 292 officers, no positive cases. So I meant to mention that. That was good news. All right, next. Parole board, subject of a lot of issues. Recently, we had Bennett, Adrian Bennett. Geez, boy, how soon we forget. She's down on the juvenile court bench in Virginia Beach now. Parole board of 5 members. And now we have Tanya Chapman. She used to be deputy here in my office. She's terrific. Former Arlington County police officer, police chief of Portsmouth. And she's now heading up the parole board. Now, again, folks, I know there's a lot of issues around the parole. You all passed a couple of, particularly in the Senate, you passed some parole reform measures, juvenile probation, for example. Those who were sentenced as juveniles after 20 years, they're eligible. Senator Marsden, that bill has been carried by Senator Marsden for a number of years. It passed this year, so that those cases are now parole eligible. Also, the Fishback cases, which has been a subject of great discussion over many years. Those who were sentenced between a period of time when parole was eliminated to 2001, when judges were allowed to tell juries that there was no longer any parole available. And so there's about 307 or 310 individuals who are Fishback eligible, parole boards working on them. But again, but the underline here, there was a lot of discussion when COVID became obviously the pandemic. There was a lot of discussion. Well, what about parole? Well, parole, there are not many parole eligible, and 95 to 97% of those who are eligible have violent offenses. So is geriatric eligible? As you know, if you've done 10 years, turned 60, you're eligible, or 65 with 5 years. So you can see the numbers. There's not a great deal of in those who are eligible are very difficult cases, folks. We've been through those over and over. They're violent offenses, and some of their decisions have received a great deal of attention over the last couple of months. But we look forward to implementing that legislation that you all passed. The Senate passed compassionate release, which was allow those who are terminally ill or have some severe physical disability eligibility. The House is studying that and has sent it to the Crime Commission. So more to come on that issue. Next. Just throwing out ABC. You all have been working with it. They've been responding to the COVID crisis. Don't want to skip our wonderful ABC in Travis Hill. Next. For the Commonwealth's Attorney Service Council. Now, this is not to be confused with VACA. VACA, you all work with Virginia Association of Commonwealth's Attorneys. That's their lobbying arm. This is the CASC, which is the state agency, small agency. They use the law school down at William and Mary, headed up by Jane Chambers. But they're the ones that put on the CLEs, the Continuing Legal Education Training and Education Services. Next. Board of Local Regional Jails. Senator Deeds, you've worked closely on this with Delegate Bell. This is in response, it always existed, but really with renewed responsibilities after the Jermichael Mitchell death in the Hampton Roads Regional Jail. Working with Senator Deeds and Rob Bell, we really changed the composition. We put on experts. with respect to mental health and other issues, and investigators who actually now can investigate or review jail deaths. And so this Board of Local and Regional Jails, which we just renamed, thanks to y'all, because it was called the Board of Corrections, but it didn't have anything to do with DOC. So you were kind enough to change the name to what it really has a responsibility over local and regional jails. So that is that has really started to morph over the last couple of years, and with renewed responsibilities. Next. Homeland Security Division, good worker here, Sean Talmadge, who has been working next to me in the sit room since February, dealing with COVID. Some of these issues, again, probably not too much related to what we're dealing with in terms of police reform or criminal justice reform, but there are responsibilities with the Homeland Security. Next. Body worn cameras has been an issue. You all know that. We're very much in support. Governor Northam very much supportive of that. That's an issue with respect to how much the resources, the video footage has to be reviewed by not only the prosecutor but defense attorney. So that's the challenge there. But I'm sure with a lot of smart people, we're going to have to figure that out. It's going to require more resources, though. Next up. So some achievements, obviously, with you all. We've accomplished a great deal. Just yesterday, I mentioned this already. Thanks for joining us. Some substantial pieces of legislation, 7 of the 8 bills the governor proposed. So thank you, y'all. Next up. This was Criminal Justice Forum, again, Second Chance Month. We declared last May. We traveled, myself in the office, we had 5 community roundtables to hear from folks what they thought with respect to what other criminal justice reforms Virginia could pursue. And many of them were represented in the legislation the governor proposed last year. Certainly fishback was a major issue, parole reforms, substantial issues, larceny threshold. So we heard from them and responded and had a lot of dialogue. And I know we're having with the help of Janice Underwood, all know Dr. Janice Underwood. She is our new equity officer. And with her help, we're going to have another town hall meeting. I believe it's scheduled for July 30th on criminal justice reform. You'll all be invited. And we look forward to continue that dialogue. Obviously, in the age of COVID, very difficult to have community roundtables, but we're going to do that one virtual and see how it works. But we really enjoyed traveling Virginia and actually hearing from folks in person. But obviously that is not possible now. Next, how are we doing for time? Criminal justice, I already mentioned. Yeah, I already mentioned those. Very good. And law enforcement, quickly, DCJS, again, I know this is going to be a major issue with you all, and we look forward to working with you, developing model policies. I suggest that with respect to these, working to develop some best practices from around the state on civilian review boards. Number of jurisdictions have already pursued that, Charlottesville, Fairfax. I think DCJS, we'd like to work with them to develop some model policies, much like what we did with body-worn cameras. We developed model policies, strongly encouraged in jurisdictions who would use body cameras to adopt model policies. And then this year, Delegate Levine had legislation mandating that, and that was passed by y'all. So I think we should work on that, and we'll and DCJS would be the one to do that. Let's see, next up. Just to give you a sense to what we're dealing with here and the size, when we're talking about law enforcement changes, it's just not your local police department. You're talking campus police, state law enforcement agencies, game and inland fisheries, forestry. There's a number of state agencies, ABC, that have law enforcement agencies. Private airport railroad. So you can see there are regional jails, 476 different agencies. So substantial number, every one of them too. You all know that. Every one of them has their own needs, own particularities. So whatever legislation we pursue, we're going to have to accommodate some of the differences with respect to these agencies, and there's differences within police departments. I mean, if something is, from Arlington to Galax, I mean, there are differences in the size of these police departments. So when we're talking about more training, if you have a small department of 5 or 6 people and you're requiring more training, that takes them off the street. So we just have to, I mentioned that, we just have to be cognizant of that. We got to do these reforms smartly, accommodating the various, the differences with these departments. Next up. And then the officers, 22,000 law enforcement officers in the Commonwealth. And then we got jail officers, dispatchers, corrections. So 41,000 in total, all regulated by DCJS. Again, varying degrees of issues that we're going to have to accommodate as we move forward. Next. Minimum mandated hours of basic training. You can see field training 100, basic training 480, and then the actual hours substantially more. Law enforcement agencies do substantially more than what is mandated. And so next up. In-service training. We're having a lot of discussions around more CIT, crisis intervention training, which we all support. Fabulous idea. More cultural diversity training, implicit bias training, all wonderful ideas. We just throw this out. They're required to do 40 hours of in-service training over every 2 years. And so you see their legal training. New laws change as you all know. We have new laws coming in every July, and then January in the case of distracted driving. So these are things that law enforcement need to be trained on. And the cultural you see the cultural diversity training that we've already mandated, and how do we work with what is already exists, and how do we supplement or complement existing training standards. Next. Oh, hey, all right. Senator Edwards, Senator Favola, I don't know, I probably got over, but obviously being asked to give a general overview of public safety, we have a lot of agencies, a lot of issues in the age of COVID and everything else. It was a lot to cover, so hopefully I've done an adequate job.
Okay. Thank you, Secretary Moran. Are there any questions to the Secretary from members of the committee? Senator Morrissey.
I've got a few. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Senator Morrissey.
Brian, you said that you got 27,000 prisoners, and you said 16 have tested positive for COVID. That is 0.06 of 1%. Do you really believe that's the figure, Brian?
No. Thank you, Joe, for Senator Morrissey for
Joe, it's fine.
No. We have about 28,000 total. We've tested to date 22,000, which is 70%. Of the 22,000 tested, 1,515 have tested positive since the beginning of March. As of today, we have July 9th, we have 16 positive cases. So individuals have gotten over the virus. They've recovered.
Okay. All right. Brian, I have sent out, I think, 50 letters to the wardens around the state because the family members have contacted me. Their loved one, brother, sister, uncle, brother, wife, whatever, has COVID-19. They have less than 12 months to serve, and I've requested that they be considered pursuant to the early release plan of the Department of Corrections for early release. I've gotten one letter back from 50 of mine that I've sent out, one, and they denied it. What's the problem if somebody's got 12 months left to serve? They've been there for 22 years. They've tested positive for COVID-19. Why can't they get out? And they've got a home plan that's in place. What is the problem?
Secretary Moran.
Yeah, no, thank you, Senator Morrissey, and thank you for the question with respect to the early release plan. As you know, this was something that was developed within the office to try to figure out a way to address the COVID crisis in congregate settings, to try to give some relief, knowing parole was not the answer because that was such a limited in nature. We presented that to you all on April 22nd. You approved it, but it's for certain defined criteria, no violent sexual offenders, no class 1 felons, and those with less than 1 year. So first thing that DOC has to do is calculate the release date, which is not as simple as a function, as we've learned, to figure out when exactly what individuals have less than 1 year. And also, we wanted to prioritize those with nonviolent offenders. We also had to prioritize those with adequate home plans, because in the age of COVID, to release individuals straight to the street without an adequate support system would be
For how many years?
a recipe for failure. You got to have a home plan. You got to have services, whether substance abuse, mental health services, and employment, of course, is very challenging, housing as well. So a home plan needs to be evaluated. So at this point, DOC has evaluated probably about 3,500 inmates. About 900 have gone to phase 2. And it's all on their website, but I believe we're well over about 500 individuals have actually been released according to the early release plan.
Okay, one final question, because I'm sure others have questions. Mr. Secretary, you said that with regard to fishback defendants, Senator McClellan introduced a bill. I was a sponsor on it, SB 793. That bill was passed, and there was an emergency clause. The bill was assigned on April 22nd. And that bill, we wanted a priority for fishback defendants to be scheduled for parole hearings. In your summary, you said, quote, "The parole board is working on it." Do you have parole hearings set up for those 711 inmates pursuant to the legislation that was passed and the emergency clause that was signed?
Thank you, Senator Morrissey.
Secretary Moran.
Thank you, Senator Edwards. Senator Morrissey, the information I have as of today is 308 offenders have been identified as fishback cases. 130 have had their eligibility dates calculated by DOC's court and legal, and several interviews have been scheduled by VPB, Virginia Parole Board. So let me get you, I'll reach out to the chair of the parole board and get you specifically what information I have. I've been told we have several interviews scheduled, and we'll be happy to follow up with more information.
All right, thank you, Brian.
Thank you, John.
Any further questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Chairman.
Who's that? Senator Favola?
No, Senator McClellan.
And Surville.
Okay. McClellan, Senator McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. and Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, I didn't, if you said this, I'm sorry if I missed it, but have there been any deaths of any inmates related to COVID? And if so, how many?
Senator, Mr. Chair, Senator McClellan, there have been none in the DJJ, but at DOC, we've had 11 inmates deceased from getting nodded the head. I believe it is 11 as of this morning.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Mr. Chairman.
And Stewart also.
Senator, who's next? I think
I
Senator
think
Serval.
it's Senator Serval, Mr. Chairman, and then Senator Sproul.
Great.
Senator Serval.
Thank you, Madam Chair, or Madam Mr. Chairpersons.
You're politically correct.
Brian, I had, and Secretary, I had two questions about your presentation. Number one was, I know the Virginia State Police does some data gathering about crimes and offenses, and they also do some data gathering about policing, I believe now. I think we also just passed a bill which is going to result in some additional data gathering. I think it was Delegate Torian's bill. And I was curious if you could talk about what data you're exists under your secretariat that might be available to us to help process what it is we're trying to accomplish, and sort of what data processing capabilities you all have to analyze it. And then, and not just, and also specifically on use of force. I'm not sure what you have on use of force. I know some of our localities have been gathering use of force data, but I don't know whether you all aggregate it or whether there's any standard definitions or anything like that. And then the second question I had was, you mentioned the Board of Corrections, and I believe they used to have authority over state prisons and not just local and regional jails. And I was wondering what the administration's thoughts were about why they should have authority over local and regional jails and not state prisons.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Surville,
Secretary Moran.
the first question has to do with data, and I think that's a great question because I think however we proceed ahead, it should be data driven. And Delegate, you referenced Delegate Corian's House Bill 1250, which is an effort to collect data with respect to warnings and other information that may or may not be on the Virginia Uniform Summons. That has proven to be somewhat problematic because we don't issue warnings in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so Virginia State Police was charged with trying to come up with a method by which to implement that legislation, and that continues to be a subject of work. But it's very well, I think we all agree we need more data. And so we welcome that measure, and we look forward to working with you all to figure out how we accumulate and gather that data. I'll have to get back to you on the use of force, and I'd be happy to follow up with you, Senator Surville, on that data. They do collect data with respect to hate crimes. That's issued. They do issue reports with respect to violent crimes. Last year we were the fourth lowest state in the nation for violent crime. So they do collect data, and we'd be happy to share with you what resources we have with respect to data. We also have a chief data officer now in the Commonwealth, Carlos Rivera, and we're working with him to implement HB 1250 because we really need a robust data gathering. And frankly, with big data, it's been a challenge all over the Commonwealth, not just with law enforcement. Second question, I apologize. Board of Corrections. Yeah, no, Board of Corrections actually kind of a misnomer because they weren't over corrections. And that's why we proposed the name change, because they really have a responsibility, new responsibilities over the last several years to investigate jail deaths or review jail deaths. And so that's why they call local and regional Board of Correction board now. And so happy to have further discussions with respect to DOC, but that really, they do certifications of our jails. And so it's really been a misnomer over the many years, but now that they've received renewed attention and resources, thankfully, we needed a name change to eliminate that confusion.
All right, Senator Spruill.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I have two questions. The first one is the problem we're having at the Hampton Roads Regional Jail. A lot of the parents are saying that if they could shift their loved ones to other places, because we constantly have problems at the Hampton Roads Regional Jail. Have you heard anything? Do you have a handle on that problem?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Spruill, we do not have, we have the Board of Corrections reviews jail deaths. That's all at this point. And the regional jails are controlled by regional jail authorities, typically made up of members of that region. You usually have the sheriff plus the city or county administrator serving on that board. Just had a lengthy conversation with Sheriff Leonard from Chesterfield regarding the regional jail that they belong to. At some point, I think the legislature and we should take a look at how these are governed. I recognize the importance of regional jails because a number of small jurisdictions do not have the resources to have their own jail. Not every place is like Chesapeake or Fairfax that have the resources to have their own jail. So I recognize why the legislature proceeded with regional jails, but their governing boards, I think that is ripe for some more conversation about how we govern them and make sure what resources are available to them, because the experience at Hampton Roads Regional Jail, some of them, they have an infirmary, so some inmates who have illnesses are sent to Hampton Roads Regional Jail, so they end up providing the care for those who are, in some cases, seriously ill. And then, of course, DOC is asked as well because they have infirmary. So, again, I don't have an answer for Hampton Roads Regional Jail. It has been a challenge since I've been in this position, and at some point, I think y'all and we should review the governance of these regional boards.
Okay, thank you. The second question was, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second question was the promotion of minorities. I'm gonna use the word black. I hate the word minorities. Promotion of blacks in the state police department. I understand that the blacks are having a problem as far as getting promoted, that you don't have a lot of officers, I don't know what you call them, majors or whatever you want to call them, that and as well as harm minorities in the state police department. So two questions: promotion and harm blacks in the state police department.
Yeah, well, Mr. Chairman, Senator Spruill, that is a challenge, and I think however we proceed ahead, and diversity of communities from Black and Brown communities has to be a priority. We need to make sure that our law enforcement agencies reflect the populations that they are sworn to protect and serve, and state police being, our priority since they're the state. Our diversity efforts. I'll happy to put you in touch with Colonel Settle. I know he feels strongly about this issue. We've had numerous conversations. He and the governor have discussed this, and he's discussed it with Dr. Janice Underwood. How can we improve minority recruitment for not just state police, but all of those 12 state law enforcement agencies that really should start with the state? And we'll commit to you and others that we need to do a better job, and we look forward to working with you, and we'll look for any solutions people have. We're all ears, and we need to do a better job.
Is that for promotion as well?
Yeah, the promotion as well. I think you need to talk to Colonel Settle. I mean, the operations of Virginia State Police are within his domain. Mm-hmm. Clearly encourage minority recruitment and retention. And so, but I'd be happy to have you have further conversations with respect to promotions with Colonel Settle. I think that would be more appropriate.
Thank you.
Any further questions of Secretary Moran?
Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Senator Boysko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Boysko, sorry.
Secretary Moran, you gave us a slide showing the different training that officers are required to do. And it seems that there's quite a disparity and many, many different programs that are available. Do you see that if we were to standardize or to do something to streamline the different opportunities so that it was more consistent across the state, would that be something that you think would be possibly a beneficial action on the part of the General Assembly?
Madam Chair, Senator Boysko, I think that is an issue that we should pursue. We have 39 academies, law enforcement academies. Right. For instance, chokeholds, which has been a major concern of y'all's and ours. We don't mandate their use at all. We don't train on it. We don't mandate training on it. Our DCGS's only instruction on that is if they're used, they're lethal. A chokehold is lethal force. But it would be nice to know whether or not any of those academies are actually training on that method. And so I think uniformity, Senator, is something we should investigate and if appropriate, pursue.
I have one question, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Favola. Yeah.
I would just like more information on the civilian review boards. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned that several communities actually have civilian review boards up and running. And I'd like, I think both committees would like to see a compilation of what those review boards do and how they're composed and what success they've had.
Okay. Any further questions? Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Emmett here. I have a question.
Yeah, Senator Obenchain, is that right? Who
I'll certainly defer to Emmett.
Yeah, Senator Obenchain or Senator Obenchain?
Yes, Mr.
Go ahead,
Chairman.
Mark.
Okay. Thank you, chairs. Mr. Secretary, I do have a question about the parole board. And historically, it seems to me that back in 2002 or thereabouts, there was a situation in which the parole board in its entirety, I think, was dismissed for failing to notify victims and law enforcement in violation of law, policies, and procedures prior to undertaking consideration or releasing parolees. And I know that over the past several months, there have been dozens of documented cases where those same policies, procedures, and laws have been violated by the parole board in releasing parolees without notifying victims, without notifying law enforcement. And I would like to know what the administration, what is being done to address that and prevent it from happening going forward.
Yes, Secretary Moran.
Mr. Chair, Senator Obenchain, I would just caution on the allegation that dozens of cases have received that sort of treatment. There is a current OSIG investigation that was started over 2 months ago. We have yet to receive the report. And so we're going to review that when it is received, because I know there's been a number of allegations. We'll review that at that time, and we're happy to follow up at that point.
Okay. Any further questions? We've been here,
Yes,
Moran, for quite a while. Maybe it's time to move on.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Emmett here.
Hanger, yeah, Senator Hanger.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Secretary Moran, you had indicated a couple of times we have about 28,000 in our state prison system right now, which seems to be a low number. I know when I was chairing rehab, we were about 38,000. How are we doing on state responsible and local and regional jails?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hanger,
Secretary
thank you.
Moran.
Yeah, that's a bigger issue. We can happy to have Harold Clark weigh in and provide you additional information. But we do have state responsible offenders, and this is actually an important distinction for these discussions. Everybody has to realize that state prisons and local jails. We do not have jurisdiction over local jails, but there are state offenders serving their sentence in a local jail because they're not sentenced to more than 1 year on a felony. And so short sentences, even though on a felony, are served at the local jail. So we do have a number of prisoners, a number of state responsible offenders serving short sentences in the local jail. And so, in fact, a number of about 100, well over 100 of those who have been released on the early release program have been released from local jails. And that is why, because they are serving a state sentence. So the 28,000 number has been reduced, Senator Hanger. Typically, while I've been in this job, we usually have about 30,000 inmates has been the typical average normal number. But it has been reduced. One, we have early release program, about 500, over 500 have been released. Also, we're not accepting. Remember, early on when this crisis began, we stopped accepting prisoners from local jails because we wanted to limit the contact and limit the spread, arrest the spread of this virus. And so we were not accepting. So just as, we release about 1,000 prisoners per month based on their release dates. And so just by attrition, you've had that number reduced from 30 to 28,000. So, but at some point, Senator and y'all, we're going to have to start, now that courts have reopened, people are having sentences. And so at some point, we're going to have to start receiving prisoners from local jails who are committed to state correctional facilities. And, that's going to be a challenge because of COVID. We need to take the necessary precautions. But, at some point, our jails are going to start to be overcrowded, and DOC is going to have to start picking up those prisoners. So that is something we're working closely with Harold, because we have to do it in a very safe and healthy manner. So thank you for the question, Senator Hanger. I wanted to make sure everybody understood the differences and distinctions between state responsible jails and our state prisons.
Thank you.
We have two other presenters, and it's now moving close to 11. If there are no further questions, I want to thank Secretary Moran for his time and his presentation, and we appreciate it very, very much. Thank you, Secretary Moran.
Thank you all very much.
At this time, I'll introduce our second presenter, Professor Laurie Robinson, who has a very distinguished record. She is the Clarence J. Robinson Professor of Criminology, Law, and Society at George Mason University. She was named by President Obama to co-chair the White House Task Force on 21st Century Policing following the Ferguson matter. She has been involved in numerous task forces on policing and corrections. She twice served as the Assistant Attorney General for the Justice Department's Office of Justice Programs, which is a $2.5 billion agency. She served in the Clinton administration as Assistant Attorney General and also in the Obama administration. And of course, that's a position that's presidentially appointed with the advice and consent of the United States Senate. She has a long history of publications, and I won't take the time to go through all of them, but she's a very distinguished professor. So Professor Laurie Robinson, thank you for coming, and we look forward to hearing from you. Laurie?
Thank you so much,
Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can everybody hear? Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for that introduction. And thank you so much, Madam Chair, for both of you for having me here today and for the opportunity to present. I'd like to talk with you this morning about two things. First, some of the key principles in the report that our task force put together on 21st century policing. And second, some thoughts on where we are right now in terms of policing in the United States and some of the challenges that I think are in front of us. Let me start with some brief background about the task force. It was appointed by former President Obama in the aftermath of the events in Ferguson, Missouri, back in 2014. And our mission was not to delve into specifically what happened in Ferguson or any other incidents at that time, but to identify best practices on building bridges of trust between law enforcement and communities. We had an 11-member task force that the president appointed, composed of law enforcement leaders, leaders from civil rights, young activists, and academics. So it was a very diverse group. And we organized our report around what we called 6 pillars on community trust and legitimacy, policy and oversight, technology and social media, community policing and crime reduction, training and education, and then finally on officer safety and wellness. We held 7 hearings around the country, and we heard from over 120 witnesses. As we put our recommendations together and kind of debated these, I was really surprised that despite our diversity, we were actually able to come to consensus on every one of our recommendations. We had a lot of debate about a number of them, but we had no dissents in the report. The president had given us a very short deadline because of the really importance of this issue. And so we only had 2 months to put the report together, but we came up with 59 recommendations and gave him about a 100-page report in early March of 2015. So let me turn to some of the central recommendations in the report. A key theme that runs throughout the recommendations is the need to build community trust through fair, impartial, and respectful policing. And to accomplish this, we said that law enforcement needs to embrace what's called a guardian mindset rather than a warrior mindset. Now, clearly, there are some times when policing really needs to have more of a warrior approach, dealing, for example, with a terrorism incident or with a violent drug gang. But the idea here is that police should not be like an occupying force in dealing with a community. They need to be protectors and guardians of the citizenry. And this is actually a concept that goes back to Plato's notion that guardians are the people who are chosen to be responsible for protecting the democracy. So I think that's a really interesting concept and way to approach it. We also called for police departments to embrace a procedural justice in their interaction with citizens. And that's really simply about treating people with dignity and respect, giving them also a chance to have voice during encounters with law enforcement, really giving them a chance, in other words, to tell their side of the story. And I often, in talking to my students about this, say it's the equivalent if you're stopped for speeding and getting to tell your side of the story, why you were speeding, taking your wife to the hospital when she's in labor, for example. Policing agencies should also, we said, establish a culture of transparency and accountability. An example would be collecting data. I know one of the senators had raised this about use of force, for example. That's a very good illustration. And posting that kind of information regularly on the department's website. We also urged that police departments should annually survey citizens in the community about how the department is doing. This would be the equivalent to a business getting customer feedback. Find out how the citizens feel about the department. And we also said that this should be done by zip code or by neighborhood, so that you're not lumping in the responses from, let's say, the wealthy part of town with poorer neighborhoods. Now, turning to the area of policy and oversight, we said that agencies should articulate clearly their policies on use of force. Ideally, they should be getting input about that from the community, and that training should emphasize de-escalation and also alternatives to arrest and summons. One area clearly of controversy, of course, concerns how officer-involved shootings or deaths are investigated and prosecuted. And this issue prompted a great deal of debate within our task force. Our final recommendation was to require external and independent investigations in these kinds of cases, rather than having a department investigate itself. And similarly, we called for external and independent prosecutions, not having the local DA, who's often very close to the local police department, handle these. And our rationale here was really straightforward, that in order to promote confidence on the part of an often skeptical public, that you can't have an agency investigating itself. We felt that the credibility of the justice system and the appearance of justice really requires an unbiased arbiter. Now, turning to the area of community policing, the task force said that a department's primary approach to addressing crime should be based on engagement of citizens to co-produce public safety. So what did we mean by co-production? Well, in our view, the police department and the community really should be jointly identifying problems and then collaborating on approaches to public safety. So we said that departments should build partnerships with churches, with community groups, with schools, with social service agencies, and other stakeholders, and have that collaboration not be a one-time kind of thing, but an ongoing dialogue. We also said that positive engagement with youth is really key. So agencies should look for multiple opportunities, ongoing opportunities to work with kids. And related to that, the task force felt strongly about ending police involvement in school discipline. Too often, police over-involvement in discipline, we felt, has contributed to the so-called school to prison pipeline. Now, turning to another important area, and I know there was a good deal of discussion about this by Secretary Moran and the senators who questioned him, we felt that new approaches are definitely needed in law enforcement education and training, and specifically expanded and more effective training, not just for recruits, but throughout law enforcement careers. So we called for enhanced training in such areas as de-escalation and procedural justice, and as a priority, training on handling of persons with mental illness, crisis intervention training, CIT training, which I know was touched on by Secretary Moran. And on that point, we know that people with untreated serious mental illness are actually 16 times more likely than others to be involved in fatal police encounters. So that really underscores the importance here. On that point, we know that CIT training is regularly given in many departments throughout the country now to special units. But what we called for was that every officer gets some shorter CIT training so they have some knowledge about how to deal with these individuals, because they will have those encounters at some point, likely within their careers, and there may or may not be time to call in a special unit. We also called for training on interpersonal social interaction skills, not just tactical skills, because police academies really excel at the kind of technical skills like firearms training for young recruits. But there is surprisingly little focus on how to talk and interact with citizens. And yet that's what officers do every single day. And it's a crucial skill, particularly in situations that become heated and where de-escalation is required. There's recently published literature, which I'd be happy to share with your staff, that confirms that one evidence-based training model, a program called T3, that's been pilot tested in several jurisdictions, can actually help in reducing use of force. So this is a very fast run through of some of the highlights of the report's key recommendation. But I wanted to leave time to talk briefly about where I think we are today. In my view, Ferguson did have a tremendous impact on the policing landscape, even though there clearly is a lot more that needs to be done. I think in the 5 years, or now 6 years since Ferguson, that police leaders have been far more receptive to the need for change and have taken many steps. Just a few examples. In 2016, a year after our report came out, one of the major police leadership groups, the Police Executive Research Forum, undertook a comprehensive examination of the use of force policies and released a groundbreaking set of 30 guiding principles on the subject. The following year, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is the largest policing association in the world, actually, joined with the Fraternal Order of Police, the FOP, which is the largest police union in the country, and 9 other law enforcement organizations to also issue a consensus policy on use of force. Now, this was more modest than the prior one I mentioned, but it was important because of the reach of the number of organizations in policing that got behind it. And some of the revisions in use of force policies, I think, are having an impact. From research that's been conducted on the largest law enforcement agencies in the US in the 2 years after Ferguson, they found that 39% of those agencies changed their use of force policies, revised their training to incorporate de-escalation, and during that period, officer-involved shootings in those agencies dropped by 21%. So these are small steps forward, but they do show the right direction. We've also seen state legislative action, and I know Virginia has taken some of those steps and instituted the training, as the secretary discussed. A 2017 study by the Vera Institute of Justice, for example, found that in the 2 years after Ferguson and after our report came out, 34 states, as an example, adopted nearly 80 new laws in the policing area, addressing issues ranging from use of force and mandated training on de-escalation to body-worn cameras and racial profiling. So there are many examples, many more I don't have time to go into, but I think a relevant question to ask is, what are some of the challenges to further progress in this area? And I would just touch briefly on 2. The first is obviously the very decentralized nature of policing in our country. As you probably know, there are 18,000 state and local law enforcement agencies around the United States. We have a very decentralized federal system, and the kind of statistics that Secretary Moran laid out clarify that. And another thing that he also pointed out is the varied size of those agencies. Of the 18,000 nationally, fully half of them have 10 or fewer sworn officers. So even if there were a desire for instituting training in all those agencies, the small agencies don't have the capacity to do a lot of that. And even if there were regional training, they would not have the capacity to send off their few number of officers to regional training and meet the shift requirements. A second type of challenge, getting buy-in from rank and file officers is in many instances going to be tough. I mentioned how I have seen a shift in approach on the part of leadership in policing. But as recent events have shown, I don't think rank and file officers have yet bought in to the need for change. But I think, as in any longstanding institution, whether it's education or medicine or any other, changing culture is a big challenge, though it needs to be tackled. I think some ways to address this certainly are through training or other steps. But I think a key area that needs attention is also to focus on recruitment and hiring, looking at who we're bringing in as the next generation of young people coming into policing. When my co-chair, who was Chuck Ramsey, the then Commissioner of Policing in Philadelphia, when we were wrapping up the work of the White House Task Force, then President Obama asked Chuck and me, was there any area in our short time we had to work on this that we did not get time to address? And both Chuck and I said to the president that that area was recruitment and hiring. I think that if we're trying to look to bring together people who can embrace more of a guardian mindset, we need to, and also very important to the point that Senator Spruill brought up, who are reflective of the communities who are being served, reflective ethnically, racially, and culturally. That's going to be very important to shape policing going further into the 21st century. I would also note it's going to be important to reflect from a gender standpoint. Just as a footnote, only 13% of police departments are comprised of women, and that figure has been stagnant for over 2 decades. And as a second footnote, research tells us that women use excessive force at a much, much lower percentage or rate than their male counterparts, and are more skilled at using their verbal skills to de-escalate incidents. So for a variety of reasons, adding more women to police departments would be a wise move.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Deeds.
Did you say 13% of police agencies have women, or that 13% of officers are women?
The latter.
Okay, thank you.
So to wrap up, there are obviously a host of issues to be addressed here, substantial challenges, but I will tell you that I remain an optimist that we can really make progress here on what are obviously very fundamental questions that are very important to our democracy. So thank you again for having me, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Professor Robinson. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Senator Sherrill.
Thank you. Professor Robinson, I appreciate your comments. You know, Fairfax County just put out their use of force data, and it showed that even though female officers are 15% of the force, they're only involved in 7% of the use of force incidents. So it's consistent with what you just said. But my question is, in any of the research that you've done, have you seen any correlation whatsoever between mandatory minimum punishments for interactions with law enforcement officers and a reduction in violent encounters between law enforcement officers and civilians?
I have not seen any research along that line, so I can't speculate. Sorry.
Okay. Any other? I have a question, Professor. You mentioned earlier, I think you said P3 training, or did I misunderstand you? Something with the three.
Oh, yeah. The name of the training is called T as in Tom, T3.
And what is that? What are the threes? What are the 3 T's?
You know, it's one of these things that a consulting firm named it. So it's something like tact, talking, and something. I'll have to get back to you on that. I'll let your staff know about that.
Yeah, I'd be curious. Okay.
Yes,
Any other
course.
questions?
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Senator Boysko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor, I saw you speaking a few weeks ago also and really enjoyed your presentation. One of the questions that I have on some clarification is dealing with police in the schools. Are you saying that having them at all in the schools is a problem, or simply having them involved in discipline? Because my understanding is that there are a number of schools who appreciate having a police officer in the school, but I am also concerned about the pipeline to prison. I'd like you to clarify that for us, please.
Yes, thank you for raising that, because I should have clarified it. Neither the task force nor I believe that officers should be removed from schools if they are handling it in the correct, in our view, correct way. Our point was that they should not be involved in the discipline side, that's for the school to handle. But I have personally seen many instances, many ways, including in Philadelphia, where a deputy chief under Chuck Ramsey worked very closely with the schools and got so enthusiastic that he quit the police department to go and run the program with the students. Really an inspiration. I think that where the police officers, the school resource officers, are working in collaboration with the school in a collegial way with the kids. And obviously, if there's a terrible incident, that they can exercise their enforcement side, so be it. But they should not be called on by the school or on their own exercising a discipline function. That is not the role they should be playing.
Mr. Chairman, Sproul, question?
Senator Sproul.
Yes, I want to agree with Professor Robinson. My concern was in our area, I'm talking about Chesapeake and North that I know about, when there was a discipline problem with a kid that the school could handle because there was a fight, for example. Right off the bat, they give it to the police officers. Next thing they know, they can't a kid downtown. That's something that could be a discipline problem for just a simple fight. All of a sudden, it's a charge problem by the police department. So we want to know that should we have a different trained type of policeman to all those things? And I do agree. I hate to admit this. I'm a male, but I do agree. I think female handle things much better than a man. Oh Lord, what did I say?
By the way, my husband hates it when I say this.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Robinson.
I'm not surprised women handle things like this a whole lot better than men do.
Called raising children, I think.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Senator Obenchain.
Thank you. Professor Robinson, thank you very much for your presentation. I just have a quick question about community policing. I wonder whether you have a view about the efficacy of programs like Operation Ceasefire. I think it evolved into Project Safe Neighborhoods. It was a program that I think started in the 90s in Chicago and Boston to build community relationships and reduce violence in urban communities. I've heard a bit about that and wondered if you have any views.
Yes, I think that it's I think it is very successful and has been really, and I think the research would show that as well, but that it has been very effective in building relationships at the community level and actually has been shown to reduce crime.
Thank you.
And that this has been shown effective actually in multiple cities, which is always one of the tests the academics want to see.
I have a question, Professor John Edwards here. The CIT program, Crisis Intervention Team Program, that actually started in the New River Valley, and I understand, as part of my district, and I understand something like 70% of localities have it. I don't believe it's a state mandated program. Each locality can do it if they want to. Some do, many of them do, and it's growing, I think. But are you recommending that it become a statewide program, that it be mandated for every locality in Virginia?
Yes, I would strongly recommend that because it is something. I think that what I would recommend is, even if a smaller jurisdiction can't do what is the routine 40-hour training, that there be some training for officers, a shorter course of training for officers so that they at least have the kind of how to recognize the symptoms of mental illness and mental disability. It's both. So that in dealing with individuals, they don't think, for example, somebody is acting belligerent when it may be symptoms of disease.
Follow up, slightly different question, but somewhat similar. You mentioned that President Obama, you told him that you had not done enough in recruitment and hiring in your task force. Could you follow up on that? What do you mean as far as recruitment? And I think I understand what you're saying, but could you elaborate further on recruitment and hiring being an issue?
We felt that because we had not made any recommendations in that area, that it was a set of issues that needed attention, and looking at questions about, for example, how to address and look at whether there are criteria that states or localities are using that serve as barriers to people applying to become officers. For example, tattoos. I've heard young people say, well, I can't apply to be a law enforcement officer in X, Y, and Z areas, counties, or states because I have some tattoos on my arm. Now, I think a number of jurisdictions are changing those, but that would be one, or about minor drug use in the past. So some jurisdictions are loosening some of those rules. I had a former police chief who's now retired tell me that when he was hired, which would have been 30 or maybe 45 or 50 years ago, I'm not sure. He said the only thing they cared about was his eyesight, how tall he was, and whether he was gay or not. So these kind of criteria change over time. And so to look at those things, and there are also questions whether what kind of educational criteria should be sought. Should the people hiring be looking for more than a high school education? Should they be looking for 2 years of college or more? Do we want to have an older recruits, or should we try to be encouraging high schools to have law enforcement academies to encourage more young people, let's say in urban areas, in minority communities, to become interested in law enforcement, because in many areas there's an aversion to law enforcement for obvious reasons right now because of hostility to police, and yet we're trying to get more African American and Latino people to join law enforcement agencies. So thinking about strategies. The same is true with women. How do we get more women into policing? So part of it's about strategies, part of it's about qualifications, and part of it is really thinking about who do we want to be part of our police departments as we're kind of thinking of and maybe reimagining what we want policing to be like going forward. So it's a big set of questions and a small set of questions.
I have one question, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Senator Favola.
If nobody else is in the queue. Thank you. I just want to bring up, thank you, Professor Robinson. It was an excellent presentation. One of the topics that many individuals have approached us about, both experts and community activists, has evolved around a co-responding model where a police officer would go on site and a mental health worker would also go on site. And in some cases, the mental health worker would actually be the site supervisor. So the police officer would only be there to ensure safety, but the mental health worker would be dealing with the, alleged offender. Have those models worked? I mean, Houston has a model like that. There are other similar models, but not exactly like that coming up around the country, which is sort of reinventing policing in many ways. If you have any information on that, I think it would be helpful to share.
Yeah, obviously there's a huge amount of interest in this right now. I don't know that there are many models of this, and I think there's almost no literature about it. I think one of the things we need now are some studies about this. Eugene, Oregon has a program called Cahoots. I don't know that there's any literature research on it. In the last month or few weeks, Albuquerque, New Mexico's mayor has set up something like this with a central 911 response system that can send out, you're aware of this apparently, people to deal with addiction, mental health,
Right.
And homelessness issues. I think that we need to look at the experience of these other jurisdictions, but I don't know that I am dubious that there's any research at all yet on them. And as you would be well aware, some of this is down to kind of the nuts and bolts of how to get local jurisdictions to sit down with the hard work of kind of coordinating how it actually works. And I do support the notion of law enforcement being at the table, because when these calls come in at 3 a.m, you don't want to send out a social worker alone. It's not going to be necessarily safe.
Professor, has there been any research concerning, you mentioned you'd not studied mandatory sentencing with regard to people who assault a police officer, but with regard to the length of a sentence, and I guess it's very individualized, but the length of a sentence with regard to deterring criminal behavior?
Yeah, I think that the research shows that the length of a sentence is not necessarily a deterrent. The deterrence comes from swift and certain.
Surety and quickness.
Yeah.
Right? That's what deters criminal activity, not the fact that I might get a mandatory life or death or anything else.
No, it's the certainty and the swiftness.
John, Mr. Chair.
Senator Morrissey.
Professor, thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your time. 2 very quick questions. Early on in your presentation, you spoke of a need for an external and independent investigation with respect to excessive force, police brutality, etc. You said the police should not be policing themselves, and it should not be the prosecutor in that jurisdiction. Right. Do you have a suggestion on who would be this external or independent reviewer? Would it be a prosecutor in another jurisdiction or some other entity?
We did not have a specific recommendation, but those who have kind of responded to that recommendation have taken a number of different steps. For example, Senator, in Maryland, one county had the next county's state's attorney do the prosecution, and then they in effect switched. So in Montgomery County, they had the Howard County state's attorney do the prosecution rather, and vice versa.
Okay. You don't have to, Mr. Chair.
Senator Morrissey.
You don't have to respond to this, but I will share with you a little vignette that in the 90s, early 90s, 2000, there was one particular prosecutor in a jurisdiction in Northern Virginia. Won't mention the county or the name. Was named after a prince's son in England, but there were 22 evaluations done of police brutality. There were 22 justified shootings, including one person who was riddled with 7 bullets and had no gun. So I'm just saying, having a prosecutor from a nearby jurisdiction do it might not be the answer. Second question, you don't have to respond to that. Just wait. The last quick question is, did your group do any study or evaluation of the concept of qualified immunity?
No, we did not bring that up at all.
All right. Thanks again for your work.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions of Professor Robinson? Professor, thank you so much. It's now after 11:30. We appreciate so much your taking your time to give us the benefit of your thoughts and your expertise. We look forward to working with you in the future. I hope you will be available for us to consult with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Our next presenter is Kim Rolla. He's joined the legal aid as the Lewis Powell Fellow in 2013. He has been and he transitioned in 2017 to the Civil Rights and Racial Justice programs of legal aid. And he's a graduate of the College of William and Mary and the University of Virginia Law School. So thank you, Kim, for being with us. Thank you very much. Look forward to hearing from you, Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. And good morning, Senators. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm really honored to be here with these distinguished speakers. As Senator Edwards mentioned, my name is Kim Rolla. I am the Interim Director of Legal Aid Justice Center's Civil Rights and Racial Justice Program. We are a civil legal aid program, so I imagine some of you may be wondering why we're here with you today discussing the criminal legal system. So here at LAJC, we believe that to be an effective anti-poverty organization, we have to also address racism. And we believe that we can't do both anti-poverty and race equity work without addressing the criminal legal system. We have to do that to be effective. And that's because there's a disparity. Our low-income clients are more likely to interact with the police and the criminal legal system. And then second, that we found that contact itself is a vector of poverty. It destabilizes our clients through the loss of housing, employment, financial resources. And actually, we've partnered with many of you on these committees on this work in the past. For example, someone already mentioned this morning, the Senate's historic bipartisan, nearly unanimous repeal of the statute that suspended driver's licenses for non-payment of court debt, which trapped thousands of Virginians in a cycle of debt and incarceration. That repeal led the way for efforts that are now spreading across the country. And we're grateful for both Senator Stanley, Senator McClellan's leadership on that issue, and many of you on the Joint Committee. We've also done work in the General Assembly to address our pretrial system in Virginia. We've pushed for uniform statewide data on who is in our jails pretrial and why, because we know that 46% of our jail population approximately is there awaiting trial. We've also fought to guarantee a meaningful first appearance in court, where those who are detained have access to a lawyer and an ability to present bail arguments the very first time they're before a judge. And we've attempted to strike presumptions against bail that turn the presumption of innocence on its head. We do this work because we know incarceration for even a few days can cause serious harm, leading to loss of employment, housing, limited access to medical care, and much more. Finally, we've worked with members of this committee to guarantee that no Virginia student will be criminalized in the classroom, on the school bus, or at a school event for, quote, disorderly conduct that would not be criminal elsewhere. This is a historic moment for us to continue this work, an opportunity to boldly advance criminal legal system reform that will improve the lives of all Virginians, but particularly poor Virginians and Virginians of color. The twin crises of the global COVID-19 pandemic and the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis Police Department officer have forced a reckoning with an ugly old truth. Black Americans face brutal disparities in nearly every US system. Structural racism permeates our healthcare, as evidenced by disparities in COVID-19 deaths, our housing, as evidenced by those who will be hit hardest by the coming avalanche of evictions, and of course, policing. Policing is but one branch of the tree of American violence against Black communities, a tree that has deep historical roots, but it is one that we cannot afford to delay action on any longer. LHSC is grateful for the General Assembly's recognition of the need for an expanded special session to address both the emergency of COVID-19 pandemic and the urgency of criminal legal system reform. I'd like to spend the majority of my time with you talking about specific legislative priorities that have grown from our work alongside our client communities. But I would be remiss to not first note that people around this state have been living, talking, and thinking about these issues for a long time. Those directly impacted communities must lead this conversation. They are working on a broader set of reforms than I could ever cover in 15 minutes with you here today. I want to lift up those partners that are not presenting today and the importance of their efforts. For example, ending pretextual policing, reforming marijuana law, many other efforts, some of which I know you have already begun to take action on. Legal Aid Justice Center will remain involved in those conversations as they move through the General Assembly, following the lead of those communities that are most directly impacted by the policies. I also, before I begin talking about our specific priorities, want to extend the offer to connect any of you with the advocates and community members that we are in relationship with that are working on these issues. The legislation produced during special session will be the better for it. So now turning to our work, LHSC's police accountability priorities for this special session have grown out of deep work with our client communities at the local level. In the wake of Charlottesville's deadly Unite the Right rally in August 2017, we helped the community organize for and eventually succeed in establishing the third civilian oversight body, or also known as Civilian Review Board, in the state. That same year in 2017, we began working with multiple community organizations in Richmond, fighting for civilian oversight of their police department. And just this last month, that group succeeded in introducing an ordinance to Richmond City Council to establish civilian oversight in their city. These years of working alongside community members have taught us invaluable lessons about what local communities need from you, their legislature, in order to provide effective community oversight of law enforcement agencies. The problem is, localities are not currently explicitly authorized by statute to form civilian oversight bodies. These bodies are advisory only. They have no clear mechanism to compel witnesses or the production of documents. They are only able to issue unenforceable recommendations. After deep listening to the communities engaged in these efforts, our proposed solution is for you to pass enabling legislation, giving localities 3 explicit powers to create meaningful police oversight. First, explicitly empower localities to establish civilian oversight bodies for the purpose of overseeing a law enforcement agency within their jurisdiction. Second, enable localities to vest those civilian oversight bodies with subpoena and subpoena ducis tecum power, permitting them to directly request the circuit court in their jurisdiction compel the appearance of witnesses and the production of documents related to the oversight of a law enforcement agency. And third, allow those localities to give oversight bodies the final disciplinary authority regarding certain civilian complaints. To achieve this third objective, I just want to note that the General Assembly would also need to remove certain statutory barriers related to other grievance procedure laws, which I'm happy to talk about exactly what those are if there are questions. Civilian oversight, when done well, ensures that the communities who are most harmed by destructive policing have democratic control over those law enforcement agencies. But the localities need you to give them the tools to do it well. That said, civilian oversight itself is just one step towards addressing a fundamental power imbalance between law enforcement agencies and the communities that they police. 2 other issues that we see as deeply connected to our community-driven police accountability work and capable of being addressed in special session are 1, public access to law enforcement disciplinary records, and 2, reinstating the moratorium on criminal fines and fees, interest accrual, and collection efforts during the pandemic. Turning first to the FOIA black box around law enforcement. The problem is that the Freedom of Information Act exemptions currently, under current Freedom of Information Act exemptions, the public currently has no right to access information regarding if and how law enforcement officers are disciplined for specific instances of misconduct. That includes excessive use of force, and it even includes deadly uses of force, or to identify law enforcement officers who engage in a pattern of such behavior. Our proposed solution is to strike that exemption from FOIA for law enforcement disciplinary records. This would provide Virginia residents the ability to access critical information regarding law enforcement officer misconduct, and it would also allow the civilian oversight bodies I was discussing earlier to access this information without a subpoena. Those civilian oversight bodies could then hold public hearings regarding disciplinary issues and patterns and issue public reports on their findings. Turning to fines and fees, under the Virginia Supreme Court's declaration of a judicial emergency, there has been a moratorium on interest accruing on court debt and the referral of delinquent accounts to collections. However, this moratorium is set to expire at the end of July, and it appears that the court does not plan to extend it. As we saw in the Department of Justice's Ferguson report, the use of fines and fees as a revenue-generating mechanism can lead to draconian policing of low-level offenses and other abuses. In a time of anticipated revenue shortfall, we ask you to ensure that the criminal legal system does not act as a debt collector while many of your constituents struggle with financial hardship. Beyond these special session priorities, I'd like to touch briefly on several major issues that we look forward to working on with the Virginia State Crime Commission this fall and the General Assembly in 2021. There may be discrete pieces of these issues that can advance in special session in recognition of the urgency of these topics and our current circumstances, but that cannot slow efforts to comprehensively address these issues. Between August and next January, we must continue to work to transform these systems. The first is expungement. Criminal records create barriers to employment, professional licensure, housing, education, and many other opportunities. Under the current law, only an extremely narrow category of records is even eligible to be expunged. Charges that prosecutors have decided to not pursue and acquittals. And the process for expunging these records is difficult. It requires obtaining numerous certified records, filing a petition, and the process is expensive. We must create a system of expungement that provides more people a clean slate. That system should expand eligibility, be accessible. Ideally, it would eventually be automated, and it should not cost money. The second is parole. In Legal Aid Justice Center's 5 years of litigating Scott v. Clark, a federal class action challenging the constitutionality of medical care at VDOC's Fluvanna Correctional Center for Women, we've seen what it means to age in prison. COVID-19 has only further highlighted the extensive medical needs of that population and their unique vulnerability. As Secretary Moran mentioned, 11 people in VDOC custody have died since the pandemic began. We have lengthy sentences in Virginia and a myriad of mandatory minimums that take away judicial discretion. We must take steps to expand release mechanisms that treat people held in our prisons holistically as human beings. In the short term, this means expanding geriatric parole and compassionate release. But we can't stop there. We must examine Virginia's abolition of parole and create more mechanisms for mercy in our system. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I truly believe these committees and your colleagues in the Senate and the House, you stand on the threshold of making historic strides towards both racial and economic justice. We at LAJC look forward to taking an active role in working on these issues in the potential special session and beyond. And I'm happy to take any questions that the senators may have.
Okay, any questions to Kim Rolla? Thank you so much for your presentation.
Serville has one.
Senator Serville.
Kim, thank you for the presentation. I had a question about the Civilian Review Board issue you mentioned. In some of our initial discussions with law enforcement about that, they have suggested that there also be some law enforcement presence on the boards themselves, like, you know, that some law enforcement members of the board to provide information to the civilians. You know, I'm an attorney, licensed lawyer, and all of our professional discipline is overseen by fellow lawyers. The same thing's true with doctors, accountants, other licensed professions in the Commonwealth. And I was curious what your thoughts were about having input from law enforcement on the civilian review panels, so that, you know, the civilians on the panel could have their perspective about what they're seeing with that officer. I think in Fairfax County, we have an advisory civilian review panel, and I believe there's law enforcement on that one.
Yeah.
And my understanding of it is that in general, the law enforcement and the civilians on the panel so far have been agreeing on a lot of things. And so I'm just curious where you think about all that.
I certainly believe that it's essential that we fully train the members of these civilian oversight bodies. And I think that includes training on law enforcement policies, procedures. They need the knowledge and the skills to effectively oversee. That's absolutely true. Though I will say that the one of the core principles that the National Association of Civilian Oversight for Law Enforcement lifts up as a feature of effective civilian oversight is true independence. And I think there's obviously a tension there to have a voting member of the body that is that works for, is employed for the agency that it's overseeing. I will point to the Charlottesville board that we've worked very closely with in their bylaws. I think the way they kind of navigated that tension was to have one non-voting member who was a former law enforcement employee. So getting that kind of knowledge base and expertise to the group without having some of those tensions around conflicting roles.
I have a question. How many localities in Virginia have a civilian review board, and nationally, what percentage have civilian review boards?
Mr. Chairman, in Virginia, there are 3 civilian review boards. There are civilian oversight bodies. There is one in Virginia Beach. There is one in Fairfax County that Senator Servo just mentioned, and there is one in the city of Charlottesville. There are many jurisdictions that are currently looking at expanding, at establishing these models. I will actually say that my phone just lit up with someone asking me about one right now, which I think may be related to your presentation. So I think that we can expect these models to spread, because as one of the challenges that the last presenter mentioned in addressing policing issues is the variation among departments. It really is a conversation that I deeply believe has to involve local communities and the realities in their specific community and with their specific department. So so there's 3 in Virginia, but I do think that will increase, and people are going to be looking for the state to remove some barriers that exist for effective oversight. Regarding across the nation, the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement is the institution I know that brings together the most of those entities. I don't want to tell you the wrong number, Senator Edwards. So I'm happy to look at their materials to see what those numbers are. I can say that they are spread across the country. People have been engaging in civilian oversight for decades now. This is not a new model, and there are certainly agreed upon best practices that are available to you as you think through this issue.
Hey, John Spruill, Mr. Spruill.
Yeah, Senator Spruill. Okay.
Good, thank you. I have a 2-part question. Who appoint these committees you're talking about? That's the first question. The second question: will you have anybody on that committee that look like me, my color, and also have females? Mostly, if in some localities, they're mainly all white males, and that's what we're trying to get away from. That's my question: who appoint them, and will you have females, the people that look like me on that board?
Thank you, Senator Spruill. First, I'd just like to say that actually, Senator Edwards, there are over 200 civilian oversight bodies across the country. And then turning back to your question, Senator Spruill, to appoint the members of the civilian oversight body itself, that would be the locality. Right now, the way that's done, the city of Charlottesville, the city councilors appoint who sits on that body. I think the point you raise is an excellent one. We deeply believe, and more importantly, the communities I work with believe that those bodies need to be reflective of the people who experience the brunt of policing. So the bylaws in Charlottesville, again, are drafted to reserve a certain number of seats for people who are members of a community that has historically experienced disparate policing. So that is gives illustrative examples of Black and Brown community members, immigrants, disabled people, homeless folks, members of the LGBTQ community. So I believe that it will be our local elected officials that are making those decisions. Though I think we can craft the communities really can craft these civilian oversight bodies to guarantee the representation that you're raising, Senator Spruill.
What about the females? I understand the black and brown. What about females? They seem to have more compassionate. For some reason, I hate to say this word, they even more smarter than men. You heard that, Scott?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Senator Favola.
I have a question related to this conversation, so I'll interject at this time. Is there any evidence to suggest that communities with these civilian review boards have had less lethal interactions, less disciplinary actions, enhanced trust? If that's the case, I think we can really find it within our ability to empower these civilian review boards in a constructive manner, and having all stakeholders on those boards.
Senator Favola, I really appreciate that question. And actually, I was thinking of a quote from the President's 21st Century Task Force on Policing while the last presenter was speaking, that actually directly, so one of the recommendations, and I know that the report will be sent to you, it's recommendation 2.8 from that task force is that, I'll just read the quote, some form of civilian oversight of law enforcement is important in order to strengthen trust with the community. Every community should define the appropriate form and structure of civilian oversight to meet the needs of that community. So that's from the report that was generated by the 21st Century Task Force. And I just find this one quote speaks particularly from one of their listening sessions that I think speaks to directly what you just asked, that civilian oversight alone is not sufficient to gain legitimacy. Without it, however, it is difficult, if not impossible, for the police to maintain the public's trust. So I think that there's a section in that report that I think would interest you.
That's a great answer. You have been very, very thoughtful in your presentation. Thank you.
Do you have any thoughts about the community-oriented policing? We started that in Roanoke a number of years ago, and it seems to have worked fairly well. Community policing, where law enforcement officers, on some of them at least, live in the community that they're policing. Any thoughts along those lines?
Yeah, Senator Edwards, thank you for the question. I think that one of the things that actually I'd like to, that I didn't go into much detail on, but I think that to back up, and I think this will eventually get to the specifics of your question, that I think the traditional conception of a civilian oversight body is the retroactive review. So a harm has already occurred or an alleged harm, and they're reviewing a complaint regarding individual officer or officer's conduct. One thing that we have really heard from communities repeatedly, and NACOL, the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, agrees on, is that civilian oversight is actually much broader than that. It's really about even reviewing policies, reviewing data and trends. You can audit policing data, and then that body can actually make policy recommendations. So I think some of what, when folks speak on community policing, I think that can mean a lot of different things. But I think that one of the strengths of the civilian oversight body is to hold those kinds of conversations of saying, what types of policies do we want our department to have? What kind of behavior what kind of issues should law enforcement be responding to and addressing, and what should they not? Going back to the question that we just was asked a few minutes ago about crisis intervention training and co-responding models for mental health issues, right? I think these are the kinds of spaces that we can have conversations about, really deep conversations about what communities think policing should look like in their specific jurisdiction.
Any other further questions? Senator Boystow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I have a question about incarceration. So you briefly mentioned talking about a method for helping people get back into the communities. Do you have any data from other states? I know that currently in Virginia, we have the lowest recidivism level in the entire nation. Do you have any data about other states who have done reforms around this so that they can get people back to their home communities again, and increases in recidivism. If they have good, solid programs of doing job training and other sort of skill-based opportunities while they're incarcerated.
Thank you, Senator Boyce. Can I ask a clarifying question? Is that in regard to the point about parole?
It is, but you know, or I mean, we're just. I know that last year there was a piece of legislation that gave a pathway to doing good credits towards reducing a sentence, and I'm just wondering if you've seen something like that in other parts of the country specifically.
I think and I think these are obviously very deep, as folks I'm sure know on these committees, that many of the parole bills were referred to the Virginia State Crime Commission for further study, and there's a real diversity of proposals that came from that legislation. I think the central value that LAJC holds when we're having these conversations is that every individual is more than the worst thing they've ever done. We need to holistically assess people and their ability to re-enter in a way that's safe for themselves and for our broader communities. And that shouldn't reflexively depend on the offense that someone is serving time for. I think in correctional literature, we see that actually the severity of offense is not what most strongly correlates to an individual's chance of recidivating. And there are many nuances there, but I think that we need to have a conversation that moves beyond purely a retribution framework and asks the question that you just did and says, what resources are necessary for people to live healthy, happy, and whole lives in a way that's safe for themselves and our broader communities.
Thank you. Follow-up question, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah. Senator Favola? Boyce go.
Yeah, I know we're both women with dark hair. So one of the things one of the things that I'm really interested in is exactly seeing what that data is. What do we need to do to help get people back into the community in a safe way so that the community is not at risk? So we're going to have that continued low recidivism rate, and yet people are able to live fulfilled and productive lives out of jail and out of prison. And if you would be able to help provide any of that information, I'd certainly be happy to work with you on that.
And Senator Boyce, if you're willing, I would love to. I will say that we certainly help with reentry work. I was a housing attorney for many years, like, for example, helping people find housing when they have criminal records. Though we work with a number of incredible community partners that do a much wider gambit of that work, helping folks find employment, get their licenses back, do records clearing, all of that work. And I would be more than happy to introduce them to you. And I think they would be incredible sources of wisdom.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any further questions? Well, thank you, Kim Rolla. It's now moving on to exactly 12 o'clock, high noon. And I guess it's about time to wrap it up. If anybody else, unless somebody has any further questions, I'd like to remind the members of the public that we solicit your comments in writing to, and this is, you can write this down, public comment at Senate spelled out .Virginia spelled out .gov. Again, public comment at senate.virginia.gov. Thank you all for being here, and thank the presenters. Thanks for the questions. And I'd like to turn this over to Senator Barbara Favola, Chair of the Senate Rehabilitation and Social Services Committee. Thank you very much. Barbara?
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Edwards.
Senator Favola.
Thank you, Senator Edwards. I want to thank the Judiciary Committee and the Judiciary Committee staff for your assistance in pulling this together. I also want to thank committee members on Rehab and Social Services and the Rehab and Social Services staff for your help in laying out a program that's been useful. I do want to note that on the email, there's an underdash between public underscore and then comment, just so folks get the exact email address. All comments that come in will be shared, with every member of these committees. And again, we are interested in hearing from any individual or organization who would like to share thoughts and experiences and evidence with the committees. We are all striving very hard to make changes that are necessary to create a fair and just police system and criminal justice system, and hopefully we'll move on and be able to make systemic changes when we move forward over the next few sessions. So thank you all for your attention. Thank you for caring. Thank you, Senator Edwards, for your wonderful assistance and leadership on this.
Yeah, again, thank staff for putting this together. We really appreciate it. We couldn't live without the staff, both Rehab and Social Services staff and Judiciary Committee staff. Thank you so very, very much. So if there's nothing further, shall we adjourn?
We'll adjourn.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.